So just a disclosure, I do work as a mentor and a nutrigenomics clinician for 3x4 Genetics. So that is my one and only disclosure. Picture this, one of the most iconic and instantly recognizable figures in the world, the Mona Lisa, to the surprise of many, is believed to potentially have suffered from thyroid disease. These are just theories. There's no medical record or definitive historical evidence to connect her to thyroid disease, but we just have to look at some of her telltale signs. Today, I'm going to talk you through what may have been her unexpected journey and explore what it means for millions of people around the world with thyroid conditions. I'm Nicqui Grant, and I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. My journey to diagnosis mirrors many others, full of frustration, feeling unheard, and often questioning, is this all in my head? In my late 20s and early 30s, I was the picture of health, running marathons, scuba diving 5 times a weekend, working 14 to 16-hour days, and eating whatever I wanted. I thought I was a fantastic dietitian. I was slim and I felt totally in control. And then my world fell apart. After a tragic breakup and a hijacking, stress took its toll. I wasn't sleeping, and suddenly I started gaining weight out of nowhere. My energy levels plummeted and my running felt like I was trudging through mud. I'll admit, I wanted to smack my running partner every time she said just one more hill or just one more corner. Around about this time, a patient had come into my practice with a comprehensive set of thyroid blood tests, including antibodies, which I'd never seen before. We hadn't been taught about them in my undergrad degree, so I was intrigued. I asked colleagues, but no one had the answers as to exactly what these antibodies meant and how to treat them. At my annual OBGYN checkup, I asked my doctor to check my thyroid because my fatigue and weight gain were getting so out of control. I even snuck in a request for antibodies and copied myself on the request form. My doctor said that everything looked fine, but when I reviewed the results, I saw that my antibodies were significantly elevated. As my symptoms worsened, I asked to try a low dose of thyroid medication. After a couple of months with no real improvement, I gave up. My doctor also had mentioned to me that I may need IVF to conceive. Eventually, my thyroid numbers actually worsened to the point where my doctor said to me, I had no choice but to be on thyroid medication. And he put me back on, but on a higher dose. And within a month, I was pregnant. I was fortunate at that time to share an office with a pediatric endocrinologist who advised me to keep my T4 levels at the high end of normal during my pregnancy. I had a healthy baby and was able to breastfeed him until he was 8 months old. A month after I stopped breastfeeding, I gained 14.5 pounds with no change to my diet or my exercise. Frustrated, I sought the help of medical practitioners, but was mostly told, eat less, take antidepressants. It wasn't depression. I wasn't coping. Yes, it was busy. Life was busy, but I knew I wasn't depressed. Determined to find answers, I turned to functional medicine. I enrolled at the University of Stellenbosch here in South Africa and met doctors who had insights I'd never encountered. It was then that I found a doctor who diagnosed me with Hashimoto. I had finally found someone who truly listened to me, and I remember them asking me, how do you get up in the morning? That moment marked a turning point in my journey. And since then, I have made it my mission to ensure my patients don't face the same struggles I did. I strive to help them get to a diagnosis in far less time than I did. No more waiting 15 years. If only I knew then what I know now. And in hindsight, those weight fluctuations were just my immune system attacking my thyroid. The thyroid is located in the front of the neck, just below the Adam's apple. Its shape, which some compared to the ancient Greek shield, known as a thyrion, inspired the name thyroid, which was first coined by Thomas Warburton in 1656. However, it wasn't until the late 19th century, with the publication of the Myxedema Commission report by the Royal Society of London, that the function of the thyroid gland actually began to be understood. Recent data highlights a concerning rise in hypothyroidism rates in the US. An article by Hood et al. Published this January reveals that approximately 20 million Americans are currently affected, marking an increase from 10 to 12% of the population since 2009. This compares to data from the late 1990s, specifically the NHANES 3 study, which reported that 10.75 million Americans, or 4.3% of the adult population, had hypothyroidism. So in other words, over the past 30 years, the number of affected individuals has more than doubled, with the prevalence increasing by 7.7%. So this little table just shows us this upward trend, and this upward trend actually calls for an increased awareness and attention to thyroid health. So let's take a little dive into the different thyroid diseases, the symptoms, and some potential causes. The different types of thyroid disease. This image provides us an overview of several common thyroid diseases. Hyperthyroidism, or overactive thyroid, occurs when the thyroid produces too much hormone, T3 and T4, causing the body's metabolism to speed up and function at an accelerated pace. Hypothyroidism, or underactive thyroid, in contrast, happens when the thyroid doesn't produce enough of these hormones, leading to a slowing down in the body's metabolism and making functions less efficient. Graves' disease is an autoimmune disorder where the immune system mistakenly attacks the thyroid, causing it to overproduce hormones, often leading to the hyperthyroidism and its symptoms. Endemic goiter, this condition typically is seen in areas where there is iodine deficiency or the diet is insufficient in iodine, and results in an enlarged thyroid as the body tries to compensate for the lack of iodine. Autoimmune thyroiditis, or Hashimoto's disease, is again an autoimmune disease, but this is where the immune system damages the thyroid and the thyroid doesn't produce enough hormone, so it is underactive. Then we can also go on to look at thyroid cancers and thyroid adenomas, cancers being obviously cancers, abnormal cells, and then the adenomas are often non-cancerous or benign tumors of the thyroid. For the scope of this particular presentation, we're not going to go into the details of each of those diseases. I just wanted to give you an overview. And I've put this slide into the presentation because I know that you're going to get a copy of the slides and you can refer to it later. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through each and every symptom, but this diagram shows you the symptoms associated with both the hypo, which is the underactive thyroid, and the hyper, which is the overactive thyroid. And the same with this slide. This is the causes or some of the potential causes that you could refer back to for both the hypo and hyperthyroidism. So let's move on to thyroid function. We're going to have a really deep dive, detailed look at how the thyroid actually works. So thyroid diseases arise out of disruptions in thyroid signaling and include conditions like we've just seen, such as the hypothyroidism and the hyperthyroidism, as well as some cancers. This diagram is a graphic representation of how thyroid hormones regulate metabolism in the different parts of the body, particularly through the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis, or HPT axis. So the HPT axis, the hypothalamus releases TRH, which stimulates the pituitary to release TSH. These hormones respond mainly to T4 levels, which are converted into T3 in the brain. T3 then enters the hypothalamus and the pituitary via specific transporters to regulate thyroid hormone production. Then we have the PAV and albuminergic neurons, or PBN. These neurons in the hypothalamus help to control heart rate, blood pressure, and body temperature, and proper thyroid hormone signaling is needed for their normal development. Then the paraventricular nucleus, leptin, a hormone from fat tissue, so this is where the paraventricular nucleus sits, summary in this slide. Leptin, a hormone from fat tissue, affects this area of the brain and helps to regulate the TRH expression, which in turn affects thyroid hormone production. Then the ventromedial nucleus, or VMH, high thyroid hormone levels, such as those in hyperthyroidism, can promote fat synthesis and activate the sympathetic nervous system, leading to the activation of brown fat tissue for energy use. Then the brown adipose tissue, thyroid hormones boost fat breakdown, and energy production through specific receptors and genes, promoting thermogenesis and weight loss. And in white adipose tissue, the thyroid hormones and the sympathetic nervous signals increase the breakdown of fat and decrease body fat. In the liver, thyroid hormones are involved in cholesterol and fatty acid metabolism. In muscle cells, thyroid hormones promote the expression of genes that influence muscle fiber types, energy expenditure, and play a role in muscle repair. And then lastly, in the pancreas, thyroid hormones support normal development and functioning of the pancreas, including the maturation of insulin-producing cells and the promotion of cell growth for better insulin secretion. So we can see thyroid hormone really important across all systems within our bodies. So we know the thyroid plays a key component of the endocrine system, which plays a vital role in regulating many of the body's functions. This gland produces the hormones that control metabolism. When the pituitary gland releases TSH, it triggers a cascade of events within the thyroid's follicular cell, initiating the production and regulation of thyroid hormones. So I just want you to take note here. I'm just getting a little laser pointer quickly. So that is the neck and your thyroid gland sitting below the Adam's apple. And then when you have a little cut through the thyroid cells, you can see that they sit in these circular patterns with blood vessels in between. And then one single little circle is what we are highlighting here. And we're going to take a little dive into what actually happens and how the thyroid actually makes the thyroid hormone. So here we have TSH. When this TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which has been released by the pituitary gland, binds to the receptor on the follicular cell, it triggers a cascade of events that leads to the synthesis of thyroid hormones. This TSH receptor activation, in fact, initiates two key processes, 1 and 2. Okay, so the first one is the synthesis of proteins from tyrosine to create a thyroglobulin backbone. Simultaneously, iodide is actively transported into the cell through the sodium iodide symporter. Once inside, the iodide is oxidized to iodine by thyroperoxidase, the enzyme, and moved through the pendrin antiport in exchange for chloride ions, moving iodine into the colloid. So the colloid, it was the center of that circular set of cells that we saw in the previous slide. In the colloid or in the lumen of the follicular cell, iodine molecules are either paired to form diiodotyrosine, so two together, or remain single as monoiodotyrosines. So let's see how this happens. So iodine is attached to the tyrosine molecule in the thyroglobulin protein at the positions 3 and 5 of the phenyl ring by the enzyme thyroperoxidase with the help of hydrogen peroxide. This process reads circles on our positions. So this actively creates the forms MIT, which is the monoiodotyrosine, and the diiodotyrosine to form your active thyroid hormones. The DIT and the MIT molecules are then coupled in combinations of either 4s or 3 iodines to the tyrosine residue on the thyroglobulin backbone. And all of this is facilitated by thyroperoxidase or TPO. The thyroglobulin molecule, which is now, this is the backbone, it now has clusters of the T3 would be mono and a di clustered together, and the T4 would be 2 di tyrosines clustered together to make your T3 and T4. They are then cytosed back into the follicular cell, and inside the follicular cell, enzymes or proteases actually cleave them off of the back of that thyroglobulin backbone, and these free hormones are then expelled from the follicular cell back into the bloodstream. But in the bloodstream, they get bound to thyroid binding globulin, TBG, which is produced by the liver for transport. So in other words, they are bound and they are therefore inactive when they are bound to be transported throughout the body. Again, this slide I just put into the presentation so that when you go back and look at the notes, this is a one-pager kind of summary of how all of this production of thyroid hormone actually happens. The thyroid produces 100% of T4, which has a half-life of about 1 week. In contrast, only 10 to 20% of T3 is actually produced by the thyroid, with the remaining 80 to 90% being converted from T4 in the peripheral tissues. T3 has a much shorter half-life, typically less than 24 hours. So the short half-life of T3 can influence its levels in the blood test. Because T3 is rapidly metabolized and cleared from the bloodstream, its level can fluctuate throughout the day based on various factors such as food intake, stress, and overall metabolic activity. So if you're testing T3 levels, the results may reflect only a snapshot of the current concentration, which could vary by the time of the day or be influenced by other transient factors. If there is a concern about thyroid function, or if the initial results are unclear, it might be helpful to retest or conduct additional testing. We're going to cover testing a little bit later, and this is important to get a more accurate picture of exactly what is going on with thyroid hormone manufacture and activation. So what is T4? T4, we've just seen how it was put together. This is known as thyroxine, and it is the primary hormone that is produced by the thyroid gland. 100% of T4 is made by the thyroid gland, and we're going to convert that T4 into T3 in the periphery. It actually the T4 serves as a precursor for the more active form, the T3. While T4 itself has very limited direct impact on your body's metabolism, it is essential because it is converted to T3 through the process of deiodination, and iodine is removed to activate the hormone. Once converted, T4 ensures that cells in your bodies receive the necessary energy to perform basic functions like muscle contraction, brain activity, digestion. We saw in that previous picture how many different systems are affected by thyroid hormones. So what is T3? T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone and is significantly more potent than T4, approximately 3 to 4 times stronger, and it directly interacts with the cells to regulate the speed of your metabolic processes, ensuring optimal energy production and utilization. What impact it has on the body is it increases basal metabolic rate, which is important to determine how well we burn our calories. It influences growth and development, especially critical during childhood. It regulates heart rate, body temperature, and supports brain function, including mood stability, as well as cognitive abilities. What about reverse T3? So what is reverse T3? You may not even have heard of reverse T3. Reverse T3 is a biologically inactive form of T3. Instead of promoting metabolism, it acts as a counterbalance, ensuring the metabolic processes don't become overly active. So it helps to regulate the energy demand of the body, especially during stress, illness, or injury, by slowing down the metabolism when necessary. It acts as a feedback mechanism, ensuring hormonal balance and prevents overactivity caused by excessive T3. When talking about the thyroid, it would be remiss of me to ignore calcitonin, because calcitonin is a hormone that is also produced within the thyroid, but it's actually specialized cells of the thyroid called parafollicular cells, which we see here next to our follicular cells, and is not directly involved in metabolism, calcitonin, but plays a crucial role in maintaining calcium balance. It helps to regulate the calcium levels, the phosphate levels in the blood. It supports bone health by reducing the activity of osteoclasts and cells that break down bone, which keeps calcium from being released into the bloodstream. It works alongside other hormones for proper parathyroid gland to ensure proper calcium levels and muscle contraction, nerve signaling, and blood clotting. So all the other functions of calcium. Together, these hormones all ensure energy balance, temperature regulation, and organ function. Your body controls the thyroid hormone levels through a very complex feedback loop. Your hypothalamus releases thyrotropin releasing hormone, or TRH, which triggers your pituitary gland to release the thyroid stimulating hormone, which then stimulates your thyroid to release the T4 and T3. The levels of T4 and T3 in the blood provide a feedback loop back to the pituitary and the hypothalamus, either to stimulate more release of hormone or less, depending on the level. I know in my practice, I've often referred to TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, as the shouting hormone. The higher it gets, the more it's had to shout at the thyroid to produce thyroid hormone, which tells me that there's insufficient thyroid hormone circulating in the system at that particular time. What happens at a cellular level? So we've had a look now at how we make the thyroid hormone in the thyroid itself. How do we use it at the cellular level? T4 enters the cell. Here we've got T4 coming from the bloodstream into the cell, and it is converted into T3 by the enzyme Di, or if you are familiar with the 3x4 blueprint, we have a gene SNP in our 3x4 blueprint called DIO2, and that is the enzyme that is responsible for removing an iodine from the T4 as it enters the cell to activate it into T3. Deiodinase requires zinc and selenium in order to function. The T3 then binds to its receptor on a transcription factor, and it binds alongside retinoic acid or vitamin A, which activates the transcription factor, enabling it to move to the nucleus, where it triggers specific gene sequences or hormone responses, leading to the synthesis of proteins. These proteins are then inserted into the cell membrane, where they function as ion pumps, actively transporting sodium ions out of the cell and potassium ions in. The energy required to power these pumps leads to a decrease in cellular ATP levels, creating an increased demand for fuel. This spike in energy demand boosts cellular respiration, which relies on glucose derived from carbohydrate, proteins, and fats. And as cellular respiration ramps up, more oxygen is needed, resulting in increased oxygen consumption. Ultimately, this process elevates the metabolic rate, generates heat, which is why it makes us feel warmer. The decrease in ATP and the higher energy demand prompts the mitochondria to increase both in size and number in order to adapt to provide the amount of energy that the cell is demanding. Much like how working out increases our muscle mass to handle heavier loads, the mitochondria are trying to boost their activity, which is in turn driving metabolism. Both vitamin D and iron also play important roles in this thyroid function. Vitamin D is involved in regulating the expression of thyroid hormone receptors. So the little receptor here on the cell membrane requires vitamin D sufficiency in order to upregulate and be made more available. And iron is essential for proper functioning of the actual thyroid gland, as well as at a cellular level. So we know that thyroid hormones play a role in multiple systems in the body, including the liver, where it can promote glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis in the heart, it enhances cardiac output and blood pressure. In the central nervous system, it promotes neuron growth, myelination, synapse formation. In bone, it's important for the balance of buildup and breakdown of bone tissue. Within the muscles, it regulates muscle metabolism, balancing catabolism and anabolism. In adipose tissue, it stimulates lipolysis, promoting fat breakdown. In the skin, it causes vasodilation, increasing heat radiation and flushing, as well as sweating. And in the GI tract, it stimulates glandular secretions, smooth muscle contractility, motility, and enhancing digestive function. So every single organ system within our bodies requires thyroid hormone for its functionality. Okay, so we mentioned about the deiodinase enzyme, which was the enzyme that was responsible for removing the iodine of the T4 when it moved into the cell to activate it. And there are a number of deiodinase enzymes, DIO1, 2, and 3, and they are responsible for activating the T4 to T3, or in the case of DIO3, activates reverse T3. And remember, I said when we looked at the reverse T3 is really important in almost putting the brakes on the metabolism, especially in times of stress or illness where we need a little bit of balance and control. This slide summarizes the organs or the areas, tissue types that the DIO1, 2, and 3 would specifically work in or be predominant in. So this schematic was adapted from a 2011 article by Rupa Health, and it illustrates how tissue-specific deiodinase enzymes respond to factors influencing energy imbalance. So in summary, food restriction seems to downregulate deiodinase enzyme activity across most tissues, with the exception of the hypothalamus, where DIO2 activity seemed to remain unchanged. In contrast, diet-induced obesity appears to trigger the opposite effects, enhancing DIO activity in certain tissues. So this slide is a little summary of what the structures of your components of your thyroid hormones may look like. The first picture on the left-hand side represents our tyrosine. The second represents our T4. So basically, it's two tyrosine backbones with iodine attached at the 3 and the 5 positions, as well as the 3 and 5 prime positions. And then picture is our T3 and our reverse T3. So you can see that it's where the iodine is removed from this T4 structure that will determine whether it is a reverse T3 or an active T3. Here we have a little simplistic diagrammatic representation of the process by which thyroid hormone is activated in optimum health or optimal health. And here with stress, we can see that stress actually inhibits the conversion of T4 to T3, and it will promote the conversion to reverse T3. Reverse T3 cannot be converted to regular T3 again, so it becomes inactive and non-viable. This graphic, which has been adapted from the Journal of Restorative Medicine, is a summary of all the factors that are involved in thyroid hormone production, including those that either increase or inhibit the conversion of T4 and T3, and those factors that would increase the conversion of T4 to reverse T3. So again, a little summary that may be helpful to have on your desks at a later stage. So what could go wrong? Let's have a look at autoimmunity, supplementation, and hormone dysregulation. Thyroid antibodies are found in 8 to 27% of the general population, and they appear 8 to 10 years before any symptoms actually show up. So here's a breakdown of the key thyroid antibodies. TRAB, or thyroid receptor antibody. These antibodies target receptors on the thyroid or in the thyroid, pituitary gland, heart, liver, muscles, and brain, which are important for regulating the thyroid hormone levels. In autoimmune diseases like Graves' disease, the TR antibody can bind to these receptors and sometimes overstimulate the thyroid gland. The TSH antibody is an antibody that can either stimulate or block the TSH receptor. Remember, we needed the TSH to go into the little receptor to trigger the cascade to make the thyroid globulin backbone, as well as to take up the iodide and activate iodide to iodine in order to make the hormone. Anti-TG, these antibodies attack thyroglobulin, which is essential for thyroid hormone production. And anti-TPO, these antibodies target thyroid peroxidase, an enzyme involved in the production of thyroid hormones. So here I've put on my diagram where these antibodies are. So we are testing often, if you're doing a comprehensive thyroid panel and you're including antibodies, we are looking at things like anti-TG and anti-TPO. So remember that the anti-TG is targeting the thyroglobulin, and the anti-TPO, thyroid peroxidase, the enzyme that helps activate iodide into iodine. I often see with autoimmune patients who have an elevated anti-TPO that this anti-TPO gets worse if we give them iodine. Why? Because we're probably going to activate that enzyme, and those antibodies are going to recognize, hey, that's my target. That's my guy. I was made for this moment to kill that particular substance, which is destroying our ability to actually manufacture thyroid hormone efficiently. So remember the NIS. I'm just going to go back to this previous slide. The NIS is this one, and pendrin is this one. So NIS is at the little transport pore that takes the iodide from the bloodstream and takes it into the follicular cell. And then once it's iodine, the pendrin takes it from the follicular into the colloid. Okay, so I just want you to remember those two structures. Those two components are found in the membranes of the follicular cell. NIS acts as the bridge between the bloodstream and the follicular cell, while pendrin connects the follicular cell to the colloid. This diagram shows how excess iodine affects the thyroid colloid. When there's too much iodine, it reduces the activity of both the NIS and the pendrin, which are responsible for taking up that iodine. Over time, this leads to a shortage in iodine, which triggers the production of more colloid. Remember, the colloid was the middle of the thyroid cells. So the production of more colloid is aimed to try and capture more iodine. This process can cause the thyroid to enlarge or develop a goiter. Since NIS and pendrin require energy to function, any damage to the mitochondria or a reduction in their number makes it harder for them to work efficiently. And this slows iodine transport, affects thyroid hormone production, and worsens the buildup of colloid. This table from Carvello et al. 2007 article outlines factors that regulate the NIS expression and function, showing that excess iodine reduces NIS function. High estrogen, high cytokines also reduce the gene expression associated with making NIS, which then means that they are less able to facilitate thyroid hormone manufacture. High estrogen levels, particularly estradiol, increase the production of thyroid binding globulin in the liver. Remember, that's the transporter. So the thyroid binding globulin binds to the thyroid hormones, making them inactive and less available to the body to use. This can lead to lower levels of free active thyroid hormone, even if the total thyroid hormone appears normal, potentially contributing to thyroid-like or hypothyroid-like conditions. Synthetic estrogens, such as those in birth control and hormone therapies, can have a same effect on the thyroid binding globulin production. So it's important to closely monitor thyroid hormone levels in these individuals. Thyroid binding globulin levels can also be affected by other factors like liver disease, genetic variations, and inflammatory conditions. Elevated thyroid binding globulin means more thyroid hormones are bound, which makes it harder for the body to access them, to activate them, requiring careful interpretation of your thyroid function tests. During pregnancy, the thyroid gland mostly secretes 50% more hormone than in the non-pregnant state. And therefore, pregnancy represents a stress test for the thyroid. During pregnancy, thyroid function changes to support the developing fetus, and estrogen increases the production of thyroid binding globulin, which raises the levels of bound thyroid hormones. While total thyroid hormone levels rise, free active thyroid hormones remain normal to ensure that both the mother and the fetus get enough thyroid hormone. Human chorionic gonadotrophin also increases early in pregnancy and can mildly stimulate the thyroid, leading to slightly higher free T4 and lower TSH in the first trimester. Remember, I said to you, I was very privileged to share an office with a pediatric endocrinologist who advised that I run my T4 slightly higher in pregnancy. As pregnancy progresses, the HCG levels stabilize and the thyroid function returns to normal. Monitoring thyroid function is essential during pregnancy, as balanced thyroid hormones are crucial for the fetal brain development and avoiding other complications like preterm birth and developmental issues. So what are we going to screen for? This is what I would consider a comprehensive thyroid panel. This is what we would look for. When you do a panel like this here in South Africa, medical aid or insurances don't always cover them, and they can be quite costly. So I'm very selective over who I'm going to be testing comprehensively. But if I've got a thyroid concern, I'm definitely going to be looking at the TSH, T4, T3, and antibodies. And then once they come back abnormal, I want to look at those other things, the vitamin D and the ferritin, important cofactors, the importance of stress and inflammation. So we'd be looking at cortisol, DHEA to look at how the hormone balance is it balanced in favor of stress hormone production or your sex hormone production. CRP, homocysteine, both give me an indication of inflammation, glucose and insulin, as well as estrogen, especially estradiol, because we know its influence on those pendrins and NIS4. What about treatments? So we can treat with medications. there are various thyroid replacement therapies. They come in three forms. Firstly, pure T4, something like Synthroid or levothyroxine. Some people, especially those who don't convert T4 to T3 very well, because they may have a DIO2 gene variation, may need the support of T3. And this is where I find doing genetic testing really helpful, because if the patient has a DIO2 gene variant or SNP, it would flag for me that I need to make sure that we have tested the T3 and ensured that the ratio is correct. And if it's not, look to somebody to support with a prescription for something like a Cytomel. Or you can get combination medications. Unfortunately, a combination medication here in South Africa may very well have been available in the US as well, being discontinued. The other options are desiccated thyroid glandulars, which are things like NDT and ARMA. What about nutrition therapy? So iodine, is it our friend or is it our foe? Globally, mandatory iodinization of salt began in the 1990s as part of the World Health Organization and United Nations Children's Fund initiative to eliminate iodine deficiency. The goal was to address the widespread issue of iodine deficiency, which was a major cause of preventable intellectual disabilities and goiter. The global effort gained significant momentum in 1993 when the International Conference on Nutrition endorsed salt iodinization as a key strategy to combat iodine deficiency. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, many countries had adopted mandatory salt iodinization programs, and the practice continues to be the cornerstone of public health strategies in many parts of the world today. Iodine, however, can damage thyrocytes directly through intracellular oxidative stress and indirectly through the activation of pro-inflammatory phenomena that recruit low-competent cells. Iodine is essential for thyroid function, but both too little and too much may cause health problems. Deficiency of iodine can lead to mental retardation, deaf mutism, short stature, congenital hypothyroidism, which is mostly preventable. Excess or too much iodine may cause hypothyroidism, autoimmune thyroid disease, and thyroid nodules. It can trigger an effect known as Wolff-Chaikoff, leading to temporary hypothyroidism by blocking iodide conversion. Remember, the excess iodine can downregulate that NIS, which is more common in people with pre-existing thyroid conditions or at age extremes, so either really young or really old. The Basdo phenomenon can cause hypothyroidism in people with thyroid conditions like goiter or Graves' disease when they consume excess iodine. So people with iodine deficiency or thyroid conditions may be more sensitive to iodine, even at safe levels for most people. So the recommended daily amount of iodine is enough for normal thyroid function, and higher intakes don't offer extra benefit. Most people in the US get enough iodine from their diet, so supplements are not usually needed. The upper limit for iodine is 1.1 milligrams, which can be reached with just 3 teaspoons of salt. 1.1 milligrams, a teaspoon of salt is 385 micrograms, not milligrams, micrograms, 385 micrograms of iodine per teaspoon. So just 3 teaspoons of salt a day and you've already exceeded the upper limit. This raises an important question. Could global salt iodization policies have contributed to this rise in thyroid-related disease that we've seen over the past few decades? Selenium, the double-edged sword. Selenium forms an integral part of selenoproteins and other critical enzymes in thyroid synthesis. Deficiency seen in patients with poor gastrointestinal absorption or in those who live in areas where the soil is depleted of selenium. This diagram on the left provides a schematic overview of the process we discussed earlier. In brief, iodine ions are taken up by the thyroid cells, where they're activated by hydrogen peroxide through action of the thyroperoxidase enzyme. This activated iodine then binds to tyrosine residues on the thyroglobulin molecule, making your mono and diiodotyrosines. The diagram on the right shows how selenium deficiency hampers the reduction of hydrogen peroxide. resulting in heightened oxidative stress and inflammation. This disruption leads to reduced production of both T4 and T3, which in turn stimulates secretion of TSH. Remember the shouting hormone. If I haven't got enough T4 and T3, I need to get the brain to shout at the thyroid a little louder. Over time, this imbalance or the damage caused by it may also contribute to the development of autoimmune thyroid conditions. So a word of caution, in patients with both iodine and selenium deficiency, selenium supplementation can actually worsen hypothyroid production. And this is because selenium helps to convert the T4 to T3 in the periphery, which reduces T4 levels due to that feedback mechanism we mentioned earlier. In areas where both deficiencies are present, it is important to address iodine deficiency first before supplementing with selenium. Zinc, the sidekick, hundreds. Zinc is involved in over 300 enzymatic reactions and plays a key role in transport, immunity, metabolism, and cell structure. It helps convert T4 to T3 through the Deiodinase enzyme and aids in the synthesis of retinol binding protein, which transports our vitamin A. Zinc is also important for T3 binding to the receptor in the body, and severe zinc deficiency can occur alongside vitamin A deficiency, especially in malnutrition or in very restrictive diet situations. So other important nutrients, iron, vitamin A, tyrosine. If you haven't got tyrosine, you haven't got a backbone. Chromium, it's important for insulin sensitivity. Remember, we needed that glucose to be taken up into the cell to provide the fuel to the mitochondria so that it actually can generate these pumps, and various other vitamins like vitamin Bs, Cs, Es, and other antioxidants. Low levels of these micronutrients are commonly found in autoimmune thyroid conditions, though it's not really clear as to whether they contribute or they are low as a result of the condition. What about the foods that get a bad rap? Goitrogens. Don't eat broccoli, don't eat Brussels sprouts, don't eat cabbage if you have a thyroid condition. So goitrogens are naturally occurring substances found in foods such as your brassica vegetables, your broccoli, your kale, cassava, mustard, turnips, and radishes. These compounds can interfere with thyroid hormone production by inhibiting iodine absorption and disrupting the activity of the thyroperoxidase. However, goitrogens typically pose a risk only when there is an existing iodine deficiency. Whether to avoid or simply blanch these foods depends on the individual patient. So some studies suggest that avoiding goitrogenic foods may be more harmful than beneficial, depending on the context. I want to acknowledge a colleague, Dr. Christine Horton, for this slide, for the use of the slide. And here she is tabulating taken from an article in 2004 by O'Hare and Wong. And it shows foods high in progoitin, when acted on by myrosinase, an enzyme, are converted to goitrin, and it is the goitrin which prevents iodine from being incorporated into the thyroid. And we can see that the main progoitin-containing foods include this Semper, choysum, and kale. Notably, broccoli doesn't contain progoitin, but instead contains glucoraphanin, which is converted by myrosinase into sulforaphane. So there is a very strong link between gluten and autoimmune thyroid disease, with studies showing potential benefits of gluten-free diet in women with autoimmune thyroiditis. A 2018 study published in the Experimental Clinical Endocrinology and Diabetes Journal found that a gluten-free diet may provide clinical improvements for women with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Additionally, celiac autoimmunity is present in between 2 and 5% of those with autoimmune thyroiditis, and a higher prevalence rate was observed in children, which was 7.8%. The effects of soy protein on thyroid health remain controversial. Genistein, the primary soy isoflavone, has both estrogenic and nutrigenic properties, potentially inhibiting thyroperoxidase activity, especially in iodine-deficient individuals. However, studies suggest that in iodine-replete euthyroid patients, soy isoflavones do not have an adverse effect on the thyroid function. A 2014 review concluded that it is not necessary to avoid soy, but maintaining adequate iodine levels is important if consuming soy. On the other hand, a 2011 randomized study found that a threefold increase in clinical hypothyroidism among women with subclinical hypothyroidism when they supplemented high-dose soy, with iodine levels not being a factor at all. What about chemicals? So this slide shows a picture taken from a meta-analysis published this year, 2025, which highlights studies that have shown how various environmental chemicals potentially inhibit the NIS and impact thyroid hormone synthesis. These chemicals include perchlorate, nitrate, thiocyanate. Perchlorate is a chemical used in rocket propellants and fireworks, but it is also a stabilizer in food packaging to control static as well as in fertilizers. It interferes with the iodine uptake by the thyroid, disrupting thyroid hormone production, and potential dietary sources of perchlorate include vegetables, dairy products, drinking water, and infant foods, especially if they have been wrapped in packaging where this perchlorate has been used. This slide represents a study showing how various endocrine disrupting chemicals can impact the thyroid hormone production. PCBs and PCDDs affect thyroid hormone transporters and receptors. PBDEs impact thyroid hormone transporters, deiodinase activity, receptors, and hormone metabolism. Pesticides influence the pathology of the thyroid gland itself, as well as thyroid hormone transport and receptors. BPA targets the pituitary gland and thyroid hormone receptors, and phthalates affect the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thyroid hormone transporters, and metabolism. This slide is another great graphic that I had to include to show the impact of chemical on the various aspects of thyroid hormone production. Many other factors contribute to thyroid dysfunction. It's very important for me to mention halogens here, as they share a similar structure to iodine and may compete with it, affecting thyroid function. When iodine levels are sufficient, halogens don't interfere with thyroid hormone production. However, when iodine is low and halogen levels are high, hormone synthesis can be impacted. Studies show that thyroid can accumulate fluorine, chlorine, and bromine in higher concentrations than other tissues, which could alter thyroid activity. What about the thyroid gut axis? Bile acids can stimulate the DIO2 enzyme activity by activating the receptor for bile, linking thyroid hormone action with bile acid signaling. This contributes to an increase in energy expenditure in the brown adipose tissue, helps prevent obesity, and improves insulin sensitivity. Both DIO2 and bile receptors are present in key metabolic tissues, suggesting they regulate energy use. Bile acids may also play a broader role in metabolism, and their receptors in human fat tissue are linked to basal metabolic rates. The gut microbiota plays a key role in regulating the immune system and thyroid health. Meiosis, or an imbalance in the gut microbiome, actually inhibits the NIS, resulting in decreased thyroid iodine uptake and immune system, resulting in thyroid dysfunction, and can increase inflammation and intestinal permeability, potentially triggering autoimmune conditions. A healthy, balanced diet is crucial for thyroid health, ensuring all those essential micronutrients are present. Malnutrition or deficiencies in key nutrients like iodine, iron, selenium, zinc, and certain other minerals and vitamins can impair thyroid function. Calorie restriction, stress, and coexisting health conditions can further impact thyroid health. A proper, healthy diet helps alleviate symptoms, maintain healthy weight, and prevent malnutrition, supporting overall thyroid function. So again, because I come from a genetics background, I just wanted to connect the dots to personalizing your treatment plan using genetics in your practice. And if you're not familiar with the 3x4 genetics report, this happens to be a report of a patient of mine with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. The pathways in purple, or all of these pathways, actually include a whole lot of gene variants that 3x4 scores and looks at their role in those different pathways and their function. And then they give the genes and the pathway a score based on how many of these genes the individual has inherited. So purple is highly impacted. In other words, in a snapshot, we've got a good idea of what could be the underlying contributors to this individual's thyroid health. The little butterflies I've put next to the pathways represent the pathways that may be an influence on or direct influence on thyroid health. And when I was still in practice, this helped me to identify the most important influences from a genetics perspective for a patient. I could have 5 Hashimoto's patients sitting opposite me and be treating them 5 different ways because genetically, one person may be predominantly struggling with methylation. Somebody else would be struggling with switching off inflammation. Somebody else detoxification, the oxidative stress, the combinations thereof. And this is where you get to personalizing your intervention rather than using a traditional treatment protocol approach. This is just the entire report on the left-hand side, and then I've just broken it down into categories, cellular systems and cardiovascular. If you're not familiar with the report, please reach out to 3x4. Rupa is doing a boot camp. Currently, we're about to actually finish our 6-week boot camp on how the report works. Energy is around metabolism and energy turnover, fat storing, fat burning. Activity is genetically what kind of exercise should you be focusing on, or are you genetically natural at? And then nutrients. And you can see this person has a low impact in her B12 and fatty acids, so they are less genetically likely to be contributing to her thyroid picture. On this tool, we've also added the 3x4 genetics pathways to be considered in each area of thyroid function. So to wrap up, thyroid hormones are critical for regulating metabolism, energy balance, and fat storage, with T3 and T4 production carefully regulated by TRH, TSH, and key enzymes like the DIO2. The gut microbiome also plays a significant role in nutrient absorption and energy regulation, directly impacting thyroid function. Modulating the microbiota can help address metabolic disorders and improve thyroid health. In addition to hormone replacement, a diet rich in essential nutrients is crucial while avoiding excess or imbalances. Furthermore, genetic variants can influence thyroid health, such as variations in the Deiodinase enzyme or transporters that impact the thyroid hormone conversion and uptake. These 2 diagrams taken from the 2 articles referenced below summarize all of the things that impact thyroid health. Managing thyroid health also involves minimizing exposure to environmental pollutants and substances that interfere with hormone production. By considering gene variants, diet, and environmental factors, we can take a more personalized approach to thyroid care, supporting thyroid hormone balance, detoxification, and overall well-being. To conclude, I'd like to share a well-known quote by Dr. Richard Shames, a prominent expert in thyroid health. Thyroid disease is often misunderstood, underdiagnosed, and undertreated, yet it affects millions of people worldwide. The more we know, the better we can manage our health. As healthcare professionals, this quote underscores the critical role we play in identifying, diagnosing, and effectively managing thyroid conditions in our patients. By deepening our understanding, we can provide better healthcare and improve outcomes for those affected by thyroid disease.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.